Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Natcat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to do my February reading wrap up. Alright guys, so February went by really quickly. I think that's kind of the consensus that's going around. I feel like January just ended and now February has ended as well. It is already the 1st of March. So I am here to kind of talk through the books that I read in the month of February. I think it was a relatively good reading month for me. I think that I set out with a pretty optimistic TBR and I did a pretty good job at that. So before we get into the reviews, I'll give you some general stats that I give every month, and then we will go ahead and go through the books that I read in order of least favorite to my favorite, or highest rated, I should say. Okay, I'm sorry if the angle changed. I'm hoping it didn't. Maybe a little bit lower. Okay, now it may have actually changed. Sorry, I got a call from a family member. But to go into our general stats, I ended up reading a total of 7 books this month, which I don't think is too shabby, especially considering it is more than last month, and also this is the shortest month of the year, so I am pretty happy with that number. Page count wise, I ended up reading 1,589 pages, which is a little less than last month, but not by too much, so I'm not too upset about that. I did finally pick up my first audiobook of the year, which ended up being about 7.9 hours long. So I do finally have some audiobook hours on my spreadsheet. As far as average rating goes, we had a 4.14. Really happy that we're sticking above that 4-point average. I think the fact that I am DNFing the books that I am not enjoying is very helpful, because I will say I did DNF 1 book this month. Speaking of DNFs, because that is the lowest rated or my least favorite book of the month, we will go ahead and start out by reviewing that book. And boy, am I sad to say that I DNF'd this book, and that is Just for the Camera by Viano Omiomo. This was a contemporary polyamorous romance that I picked up from KU. I actually kind of want to say leans more towards like straight up erotica than romance, but I'm not really sure like when it crosses the line, because the reason I had to DNF it is because it was too sex forward. So for other people it might be just the right amount. For me it was just too much. I am someone who requires just a little bit more balance when it comes to my romances. I don't like when they are just 90% about the physical relationships that our characters are having. In this book, we are following 3 different characters. We have a couple who's Jordan and Kian, and they are sex workers. So they film pornography and then they put it on the website and they get money for that. Kian does have a day job, and I believe that Jordan has probably what would be considered like a Twitch, where she does like online gaming. And then they have their roommate Luca, who is a photographer, and a few years ago he was left at the altar by his fiance, and the 3 of them have been living together, and Jordan and Kian have kind of been in love with Luca for a long time, but they are kind of nervous about like expressing those feelings to him, especially as he was like overcoming the heartbreak that comes with being left at the altar. At the beginning of this book, they are kind of like fooling around on the couch, and Luca comes home early and kind of like catches them. At first, like he kind of sits down and they're like trying to like pretend like they weren't doing anything, and then he kind of like is like, oh, you know, I better go because it looks like you guys are like got your own thing going on. And they confess to him that they have been interested in trying something new on their channel, and that they are interested in voyeurism, which is essentially when like there's someone watching you. And when they tell him this, Luca, who has been starting to feel stronger feelings for his roommates, kind of volunteers himself to film a video with them where he is pretending not to notice that they are fooling around on the couch. And it's supposed to be like one of those moments like, oh my gosh, they have to be really quiet, you know, and it's supposed to be really tense and really sexy, and it is. You know, I enjoyed reading it. I really loved the characters. That is what kept me going in this book for 221 pages. I DNF'd this book at 73% because I really did love the characters, and so I kept wanting to go, but unfortunately it just got to the point where it was just too much, either having sex, thinking about sex, thinking about like just being horny in general. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like I get it, but it was getting so repetitive and it was getting a little bit boring. And to me, while I definitely think the author can write a good smut scene, and I really enjoyed like the characters, I thought they were really sexy, especially Keen. I thought that the fact that he was really someone who cared. He was like a caretaker, kind of like he really liked to cook for the people that he loved. He was always there to support them and to kind of help guide them in their decisions. Did he allow other people to care for him and express his concerns so that they can have an open conversation about things? No. That was something he had to work on. But outside of that, he was just like this really shy guy who wore his heart on his sleeve. But like when it came to the bedroom, he was kind of like bossy a little bit. So I really liked his character, but even that ended up just like getting overplayed in my opinion. There were some side things that I was interested in that I kind of also read longer than I initially wanted to because I wanted to hear more about them. Kian is thinking about leaving his day job to become a full-time sex worker. All three of these are from Nigeria, and so they have, you know, kind of those more traditional Nigerian families whose opinions on sex work isn't like the best. I mean, I would say most parents in most cultures wouldn't be super excited for their kids to be going into sex work. So I did appreciate the sex positivity and the sex work positive outlook of the story, but I was really interested in kind of figuring out like what his parents thought about this decision. Jordan had some issues with her mother. She had been out of touch with her father for many years and didn't have any interest in being in touch with her father. However, she was still a little bit in contact with her mother, but she was lying about the kind of work that she was doing, and she was just getting tired of lying to her mom. And then we have Luca, who has a mom who's pretty distant and not really interested in being a mom, and he's got kind of a deadbeat dad who at the beginning of the story, after disappearing for many years, kind of reaches out with the classic "I'm dying and in my final days I want to make amends," and Luca's just not interested. And so I thought there was a lot of interesting things going on, and the author just didn't really focus on any of those things, even though they were the part that I was the most interested in. To give kind of like an example, there was a point where Jordan got an interview at this really prestigious magazine. Well, I mean, within like the sex community, it was prestigious. And she was really proud of herself. This is like a huge milestone for her. This is a huge dream. And she is someone who doesn't like to travel alone, but she tells her partner, I want to do this alone. I want to travel there. I want to do the interview and the photo shoot. And yeah, that's huge for her. And he's super proud, and she goes. Do we see any of that? Do we see the interview? Do we see her experience as she travels alone and takes this huge step by herself for the first time? No, we spend the entire time with Luca and Kian as they kind of take their relationship to the next level, where you're just like following them as they're just like so horny for each other. And I was like, to me, we were focusing on the wrong thing. So I would pick up this book if you are looking for a smut forward book, for sure. If you're looking for very likable characters, if you're looking for a book that has a positive outlook on sex work, and maybe even one that has Nigerian main characters, I can definitely see myself reading this author again, but I either need to be 100% in the mood for like straight up erotica, or I'll need to see if they have maybe some erotic novellas where it doesn't feel like it's going on forever, or just books that are on the less smutty side. If you happen to have read some books by this author that meet the novella or the less smutty requirements, let me know down in the comment, because I did like the writing and I did like the characters, so I would love to give this author a second chance. All right, now that we spent forever talking about my DNF, I just felt bad about DNFing it, so I just really wanted to like explain myself. So that being said, let's get into the books that I actually finished. I didn't rate any books under a 3.5 this month, so yay to that. And I only ended up rating one book 3.5, and that is The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. I did end up doing a Phantom of the Opera vlog where I talked about this book as well as two other Phantom related books, and you can go ahead and check that out. It didn't 100% go as planned because I had to switch out one of the books, and you'll see that later in this video, or if you've watched that video you already know. But this is the classic that inspired the well-beloved opera The Phantom of the Opera. This is a story about Christine, and she lives at the opera house as a member of the ballerinas. However, she also has a great passion for singing, and in this book she is being taught by who she perceives as the angel of music, who is someone her father said he would send after he passed away. However, this angel of music is not exactly that. In fact, a lot of people refer to him as the ghost of the opera, but he's also not a ghost. He's just a guy who lives in the opera house and makes demands of the owners. At the beginning of this book, Christine is getting the opportunity to step into the spotlight a little bit more, and there is a switch of ownership, and these new owners are not willing to follow the rules that the Phantom is putting in place, and because of this, the Phantom is causing some issues for the opera house. On top of that, an old friend of Christine's, Raoul, shows up and is showing romantic interest in her, and the Phantom, who is romantically interested in her, is also not happy about that. I would say that I am not a big classics person, so me rating a classic low is pretty common, you know? So I would say a 3.5 star rating for a classic for me is pretty generous. I had a pretty good time with the story. I read it relatively quickly. A lot of times classics really drag for me, but I felt like the story had good momentum and kind of carried me through it. It is definitely different than the opera, and that tripped me up a couple times just because events I wasn't familiar with were occurring or were happening out of order from what I was familiar with. Characters were also not as cool as they are in the opera. I kept complaining about how these characters were like wimpier versions of the ones from the opera. I really struggled with Christine, Raoul, and the Phantom. They weren't the most likable. This book I felt like had a very dramatic flair to it, which sometimes I appreciated and other times had me rolling my eyes and was getting into a little bit of that silly goofy territory where I was hoping for something a little bit more suspenseful and serious. I did laugh a few times throughout this book. I do think that it was meant to have some moments of humor within it, so I did appreciate that. And overall, I am glad that I did finally read this, just because this story is such a big part of my childhood. I mean, I spent a lot of years obsessed with the Phantom. Having the blueprint to this story is actually quite nice for me. So would I say that this is a necessary read for those who love the Phantom of the Opera? I'm not 100% sure. I will say that I noticed that with a couple of the retellings that I read, they seem to be inspired slightly more by the original text than by the opera. So maybe if you're someone who really wants to get into retellings of the Phantom of the Opera, it would be beneficial to go ahead and check this out. Plus, it just gives you a little bit more background information on the characters and all that jazz, which can flesh out the opera a little bit more. So 3.5 stars, not terrible, but yeah, this is kind of like one of those cases where the movie was better. I ended up having 4 4-star reads. I am definitely a girl who loves to rate my books 4 stars, so it is not surprising that I had a bunch of those. So I'll just talk about these in the order in which I read them. The first one I'm going to talk about is one of the retellings that I read in my vlog, and that is For the Love of the Phantom by Devin Desai. Apologies if I mispronounced that. But this is essentially the first book in a trilogy. I would say that this trilogy is more like companion novels. This book could stand on its own, and I have decided not to read the other 2 books in the series. So this is actually a continuation of The Phantom of the Opera. This is one of the books where you definitely would want to read The Phantom of the Opera before going into it, since it is based off of the book and not the opera. So in this book, we are following exactly where the other book ends. Christine and Raoul have just left the tunnels of the opera house and are ready to leave the Phantom and all that drama behind. And then we follow Eric, who is on the quest to fake his death so that the Persian, who is another character in the Phantom who likes to keep a very close eye on the Phantom, thinks that he is actually dead so that the Phantom can go ahead and follow Christine to Sweden and eventually London. So in the story, I would consider it kind of a second chance romance. Christine's relationship with Raoul is not going that great. He definitely shows a lot of signs of being jealous of Christine's relationship with the Phantom, and that has led him to be opposed to her being musical in any way. Like, he won't let her sing at all, like even in the home, and she obviously has a great passion of singing, and she also feels closer to her father when she is singing, and so she is missing that connection that she had with her father, who unfortunately is no longer with her. And eventually, when they are in London, she discovers that the Phantom is there, and the 2 of them kind of start to form a bit of a secret relationship. Things get complicated when the Persian shows up expressing concern that the Phantom is not in fact dead, because he's not, and someone has started killing women in the streets of London, and he suspects that it is the Phantom. And so Christine and the Phantom need to figure out how they can be together, and the Phantom is also trying to figure out who the actual killer is so that he can clear his name and also hopefully take out this threat that the killer poses to Christine. So I ended up giving this 4 stars because I really enjoyed the second chance romance. I thought it was really romantic. It was really sweet. They just both gave those young and in love vibes. They were just so excited and so happy to be together that it was impossible like not to just feel good about it. I also thought that the book had relatively good pacing. I was constantly like, how are they gonna be together? She's with Raoul. I don't think we're really living in a time where you can get a divorce. We have this killer on the loose. Like, what exactly is going to happen? I think especially like the second half of the book, it had pretty high intensity where I definitely just wanted to keep on reading the story. The reason I couldn't give it 5 stars, and the reason that I don't foresee myself continuing with the series, is the author's writing. While I think that it is really great to compare to the original text, like I kept saying in the vlog, this could be canon. Like, Brooks could have written this book himself. So she did a really great job being true to the original text and kind of the writing style and even some of the characteristics of the characters. However, this book apparently was written in 2017 and I felt like it was a little too dated. Like the author was writing some things that someone should not be writing in 2017. I would say that there seemed to be like a scene where the Phantom was using like blackface to kind of disguise himself, which I was like, you're going to Sweden, like even if you were going somewhere else, like why? You could definitely tell that the characters looked down on the immigrants and the areas of town where there were a lot of immigrants, and the way that it was written just kind of made it feel like maybe that was the author's personal opinion as well. So I definitely, while I appreciated the romance and the plot of the story, there was just some stuff in like the writing that I couldn't get behind, and so I decided to just do a 4-star and to not continue with the series. Up next, I finally finished the Inheritance trilogy by reading Shades and Shadow by N.K. Jemisin. This was, I don't want to say it's the final novella. I actually think that I maybe should have read this one first because it was a collection of short stories and not just one novella. And I think one of them, they said it was maybe 0.5 and then 1.5 and then like 2.5. So this was kind of like one of those novellas that you could read before you start the series, after you read the first book, and after you read the second book. And it kind of took like direct quotes from those main stories and then was like, okay, this discussion or this character or this event that was kind of touched on, we are diving deeper into that with this short story. So I quite enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. You know, I'm never like a huge short story girly, but I did appreciate it. I do enjoy these characters. I definitely didn't mind spending more time with them. For the most part, I would say let a girl remember like who was mentioned. So I know like one of the main gods was in the first story, where in the first story, we are following a world where this very group of powerful people that are not kings, but kind of are, have imprisoned a few gods. And they have done that with the help of another god who is seeking to punish these other gods that he has imprisoned. And we are following one of these imprisoned gods kind of before he takes on his human form. Like in the first book, he is this man at day and a god at night. But in the beginning, he was just kind of this chained mass of black and shadow, and that's kind of like what we're following. And that was just really interesting to kind of see what caused him to, in a way, decide to stand up and fight. Because when he was just like the shadow, this blob, he would just kind of like drift, and he was just like, whatever, you know, I'm in prison, time moves differently for me, hundreds of years pass, and I don't really care. And this story kind of shows how that changes. Then we also follow a demon in one of the stories. A demon essentially is different than a godling. A godling is created between 2 gods, but a demon is created between a god and a human, and they're not supposed to exist. So I did appreciate her point of view. And then we follow the point of view of a third character, and I'm not going to talk about that because that character's existence is a little bit spoilery. So I would say that it didn't follow, other than the first story, the characters that I was the most interested in. However, I did appreciate all the stories. As always, love N.K. Jemisin's writing, and I'm glad to be done with the trilogy. You know, it took me, I'm trying to think, I think I read the first book, I think in December of 2023. Sounds about right. So it's been a hot second, but you know, I love me some N.K. Jemisin, and I gave this a solid 4 stars. Up next, we read Phoenix by N. Slater. This is another KU book, and this is a male romance. Essentially, we are in a town where there are 3 criminals that are kind of running the show, and the police are just not able to figure out like what the heck is going on, like who these people are, how they keep getting away with these crimes. And we are following a man who is actually the son of the sheriff, who has a tough relationship with his father, and he is actually a journalist, and he's pretty low on the rung when it comes to journalism. He is definitely used at his job. He is very talented when it comes to research, but that has not given him any positions of privilege or prestige. He is definitely still a grunt that is doing a lot of research for the higher up writers, and those writers are getting all of the credit for it. He is someone who struggles a lot with a darkness within him. He actually, I would say, has this voice within him, which I think is called dark. So I would say it's giving multiple personality disorder to a degree. I believe he has the author stated she gave him an imaginary illness, so that the illness that he says that he has in this book is not actually a real one, but it is very clearly inspired by multiple personality disorder, and he is constantly trying to make sure that this darker voice doesn't gain control. And over the last 3 years, this dark voice has been in a relationship with 3 different men, and our character has left those men because of how satisfied that darkness was with them, and he perceived that as a danger. And at the beginning of this book, all 3 of those men come back into his life in one day. So our poor guy, he's like, oh my gosh, they're all back here. And well, I am sure you can guess who these 3 guys are and just how dangerous they are. All 3 of these characters are very close with each other. In fact, they at times are intimate with each other, but they don't actually have like a relationship with each other because they always felt like there was something missing, which, what could it be? What could it be? And I really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was really an addictive read. I really came to love the characters, especially, I think his name was Aiden. I think his name is Phoenix. So he's kind of like what the book is named after. I think each book in the series is named after one of the different characters. So Phoenix, and he's a cannibal. And I'm like, in the first chapter, I really thought I would not like him, but then he became my favorite character. Like, he is the one who was in a relationship with our character first, so it has been the longest time since he has been with our character, and he's just so eager to have him back in his life. He's like, yes, it's my true love. He's back in my life and I'm not gonna let him go again. And I love him. I love this cannibal. I don't know what else to say. I would definitely say that he is my favorite character by far. I would say that this could definitely be seen as a dark romance. To me, it wasn't anything too crazy because I don't think it really talked about them killing anyone. I mean, every once in a while, Phoenix was like munching on some fingers, but other than that, it was nothing too crazy. I love how I'm like, he's just eating fingers. It's not crazy or anything. But yeah, I wouldn't say it was like too dark, but we can see where it's gonna go from here, because when I read that final sentence of the book, my jaw was on the floor. Like, I almost picked up book 2 right away. I almost was like, screw my TBR, I'm gonna pick up the second book. I did unfortunately not do that, but oh my gosh. Yeah, no, this book is definitely going to leave you on a cliffhanger. So if you pick it up, I would suggest that, unlike me, you make time where you can at least pick up book 2 right after it. I was gagged. So I had a really great time with it. It is not a very smutty read. I just want to go into that. The author does say that this focuses more on the crazy than on the sexy. There are definitely some sexy moments in here, But if you are someone who is looking for like an edgier romance, but that isn't like full of like smut or anything like that, this would definitely be the book for you. And I felt like I, to a degree, appreciated that because I was really wanting to see these three kind of develop their relationship and just kind of learn more about them as they kind of got their footing and like what exactly they were gonna do in this four-person relationship. And so I'm glad we didn't have the distraction of like just a bunch of random smut scenes going on. So I am excited to continue with this series. It was pretty bonkers. So yeah. Final 4 stars, we have Dungeons and Drama. This is by Christy Boyce. This is the one audiobook I listened to. It was for my in-person book club. We are hopefully going to meet maybe next weekend is kind of what we're talking about. This is a young adult contemporary and we are following Riley, and at the beginning of this book she gets grounded because she steals her mom's car and drives to a performance of, I want to say it was The Maid. I'm not really sure what it's called, but she doesn't have a license. So her parents are like, you could have maybe gone to jail, you could have maybe killed yourself, so we're gonna have to ground you. And her grounding is that she needs to go ahead and work at her father's game store. Her parents are divorced and she has had not the best relationship with her father. Like, she always felt a stronger connection with her mother, and she kind of holds it against her father that he chose this game store over her and her mother. And so now she has to spend, I think it was like the next 8 weeks working at this game store where people buy games and they play, you know, like Dungeons and Dragons, obviously. And this is very difficult for her because she, one, has a complicated relationship with her father, and two, she's not really into games, and three, because she has to work here, she has to let some of her other after school extracurriculars go to the side, which does include trying to bring back the spring musical because she's informed that there's no budget for it. And so she is trying to, on the side, save that because she wants to become a director. And she's like, hey, I want to become a theater director one day, and I can't have on my resume that I went to a school that didn't have a musical. So our girl's got a lot going on. On top of that, her ex-boyfriend shows up at the store with his new girlfriend, and she's like, I'm over you because I have a boyfriend too. And who is that boyfriend? His name is Nathan, and he happens to work at the store as well. And he happens not to like her, and she doesn't like him either. So she kind of blurts out his name, and he's like, why would you tell this guy that we're dating? And she's like, I have a proposition. You like this girl who only likes guys that aren't interested in her, which is kind of a dumb person to like, but you know, whatever. And I want my boyfriend to think that I didn't just lie to his face about dating someone, like some sort of crazy person. So why don't we fake date? And he was like, okay, let's try it out. And that is essentially what's going on. They're fake dating. They're playing D&D. Their fake dating seems not so fake. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I think it was a sweet, cute time. I think considering how anxious and terrible I've been feeling recently about everything, that this was a really great palate cleanser for me. I enjoyed the characters. They made me laugh. I didn't find them overly annoying, which can definitely happen with YA characters, so I appreciated that. I thought that their romance was really sweet. I thought it was really cute. I really enjoyed the friend group that was around them. I was initially going to read the second book, but it seems like it doesn't follow the same group, so I'm kind of on the fence if I want to continue with it because YA usually isn't really my thing, and since it doesn't seem to follow this group of characters that I've come to really enjoy, I'm like, is it worth it? I'm not really sure. I think the book just recently came out, so if you've read it, let me know what you thought and if I should consider picking it up. But yes, I think if you're looking for a cute YA romance, just something that'll make you feel good, then you definitely should consider picking this up. I didn't end up giving it higher than 4 stars just because, one, it's not, you know, my usual genre. To me, it wasn't anything mind-blowing. And second, I do wish that the author had focused a little bit more on her relationship with her father, because they definitely had some growth between the two of them, but I felt like some of the really important discussions they had were like really short, and I just wish we had dived into that a little bit more, because I do love me a parent-child relationship, especially when we start off on rocky ground and we kind of fix that throughout the story. So yeah, really excited to go ahead and discuss that with my book club later this month. All right, guys, 2 books to go. One of them is going to be a 4.5 star rating, and that is Masquerade by Joel Abernathy. And this was the other book that I read in my Phantom of the Opera vlog, and it ended up being my favorite. Should that be a surprise? No, because this is a male retelling of the Phantom of the Opera. I would say out of the 3 books that I read, this one was the closest to like the opera vibes. And in this book, we are following Christian, who is obviously the gender bent version of Christine, and Eric, our phantom. And just like in the original story, Eric has taken to teaching Christian how to sing. Christian had kind of lost his passion for singing after his father died, and he has just been kind of singing in the background in the chorus, but Eric wants him to kind of step forward and take the spotlights. We have the usual plot of Raoul coming in and causing trouble. In this book, Raoul is yeah, he's someone that you are not going to like at all. This author, I really enjoyed the fact that it really gave the vibes of the Phantom is not 100% the villain just because he is living on the outskirts of society, because he is different than other people. It is very much like, hey, the villains of the story are the wealthy elite who are feeling very entitled and who feel that they have the right to control the lives of those they deem beneath them. So I did like him calling out the 1% like that. I did appreciate that. This book, I just felt gave me the vibes that I wanted from a Phantom of the Opera retelling. Like, their romance was so beautiful. I loved the moments where they were singing together and they were writing operas together. It was just so beautiful seeing them kind of share that passion for music they have. It did have some smutty scenes, which were really well written, and it had also a good amount of drama to it as well. So overall, I just ate the story up real quick. I didn't want to put it down. It was exactly what I wanted when I picked this book up. This author is a trans author, and one of the side characters was also trans, and I will definitely be picking up books by this author again because I really enjoyed the writing and the characters. All right, everyone, we are getting into the final book, thank goodness, because this video is very long. And that is going to be my 1 5-star read. I would like to have more than 1 5-star read a month, but you know, I'll take one over none. And this was actually my non-fiction, and that is going to be The Transgender Issue by Sean Fay. And as you can see, let me see, I don't know if you can see that yet. I put quite a few tabs in this book. I believe I started it in January, so it definitely took me a while to finish this book. I literally finished it last night, so on the last day of the month. It was definitely a difficult read because this book is obviously talking about some of the issues that the trans community is facing, specifically in Britain. And boy, I thought America was bad, but I feel like, I mean, maybe not so much nowadays since America's regressing so much, but you know, I definitely feel like Britain is a little bit behind America even, so that is pretty shocking. This is written by a trans author. One thing I do like is that this author points out that they are in a position of privilege even as a trans person because they came out to a supportive family, that they are white, and that they come from a middle class family, and that they are someone who is pretty steadily employed, which is not the case for a lot of trans people. So I do appreciate them shouting that out while at the same time using their privilege and their role within the journalist community to write the story and spread information about their trans siblings. So I thought the story was very informative. I think that you can learn a lot about very different issues that the trans community faces. This is not a story that's going to sit here and be like, let me tell you why trans people deserve to exist. Let me tell you why trans people get to use what bathroom they want. This is why trans people get to play in sports with the gender they align with. So that's not what this argument is, okay? Those are distraction arguments that the other side is using to distract from the fact that this trans community is facing real life threatening issues. So this is talking about healthcare. This is talking about suicide rates. This is talking about the amount of trans people that are homeless, that are in sex work, the way that certain parts of feminism are trying to push trans women out, as well as the way that they treat trans men. And I thought all of it was incredibly interesting. There were certain parts that made me sick to my stomach. I think actually the most difficult part for me to read was the final chapter that focused on feminism's point of view, the anti-trans feminist point of view of trans women. It just boggled my mind, the things that these women would say about trans women. My eyes would literally be watering with like tears of rage. I feel like if I could just stand at the top of a mountain and be like, stop calling trans women rapists, like the way that they would just be like, oh, this is trans woman, they're a rapist, they're a rapist, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm going to read you something, and I apologize because it's going to be very disturbing. I think that what shocked me so much about this last chapter is because a lot of the other chapters talked a lot about things that I was aware of. You know, I'm aware that unfortunately a lot of trans people are rejected by their family and by their community, and that they face high homeless rates, and that they often find themselves having to work in sex work because they can't find work elsewhere. These are all things that I was familiar with, but I feel like I didn't understand just how hateful the women and even lesbians were towards trans people. This book does touch a little bit about how the LGB community wants to get rid of the T as well, which we've seen here in America, like literally happening. But I think just like specifically the hate of lesbians and feminists was mind-boggling. Like I couldn't understand it. The fact that these people would rather align themselves with far-right conservatives, despite considering themselves liberals, than with trans people. like the math wasn't mathing for me. So I think that it just really showed you how deep this hate was. And I'm going to read you a couple of quotes that feminists have said about trans people. So just keep this in mind. I mean, I don't want to diminish what the feminist community has done. I just want to point out that this is definitely white feminism. This is not intersectional feminism. This is obviously not trans feminism. This is white middle class privileged feminism at its worst. And I just kind of want to push home just how hateful they can sound. And I'm hoping that you're shocked by it and that it really hypes you up to stand in solidarity with your trans siblings. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. The first one is said by, let's see, what is her name? Robin Morgan. So she was a radical feminist, and a transgender woman had shown up at the West Coast Lesbian Conference of 1973. And this trans woman had left because she was kind of taken aback by the rude treatment that she was receiving. And after she left, this feminist denounced her, calling her an opportunist, an infiltrator, and a destroyer with the mentality of a rapist. 32 years of suffering in this androcentric society and of surviving have earned me the title woman. One walk down the street by a male transvestite, 5 minutes of him being harassed, which he may enjoy, and then he dares to think he understands our pain? No. In our mother's names and in our own, we must not call him sister. We know what's at work when whites wear blackface. The same thing is at work when men wear drag. Disgusting. One thing that I found really interesting is this author, she pointed out, like, these anti-trans feminists, they see the woman's experience the same all over the world. They have all faced the same oppression. We have all faced the same suffering. So there is no way that someone who was born biologically male could experience the same thing, because we have all experienced the same thing, which we obviously haven't. So that is a bullshit argument. The second one is somehow even more disgusting. So essentially, we are following Greer, who was mentioned a few times, like she just was a trans hater, so F her. And she had given a talk at Cardiff University, and this trans woman had come up to her to kind of thank her for everything she's done. Like, she went up for like a positive experience. Nothing bad happened. She says, on the day of the female eunuch, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm just going to say eunuch. It might be wrong. I'm sorry. Was issued in America, a person in flapping draperies rushed up to me and grabbed my hand. Thank you so much for all you've done for us girls. I smirked and nodded and stepped backwards, trying to extricate my hand from the enormous, knuckly, hairy, beringed paw that clutched it. Against the bony ribs that could be counted through its flimsy scarf dress swung the polished steel woman's liberation emblem. I should have said, you're a man. The female eunuch has done less than nothing for you. Piss off. The transvestite held me in a rapist grip. Doesn't that just want to make you scream? Like, never in my entire life have I had someone who came up to me and was like, hey, great job. I just want to thank you for everything you've been doing. Really happy to be here. And to be like, rapist, you suck. I hate you. Like, imagine your brain working like that. Couldn't be me. I'm not always the most mentally stable, but I'm not this deranged. So this book definitely sparked a fire within me. I have always been someone who has supported the trans community and has not understood the hate towards the trans community. And despite the fact that she kind of describes what the anti-trans community's arguments are, I still don't understand it. Y'all ain't making any sense. Just admit it. Just admit you're wrong. Okay. So I definitely think that this is a book worth picking up, especially if you are someone who supports the trans community. This will definitely be a great resource for you. And if you don't support the trans community, may I suggest you change that right now? Please, I'm begging you. There are so many lies spread about these people from the media to the governments, and it's really hard to read about because they are such a tiny portion of our population, and they're struggling to fight right now. They really are. They are at a disadvantage. They are a community that faces so much harm. The amount of violence, physical, verbal, policy violence, sexual violence that is faced by this group every single day, and for them to lay there suffering and realize that despite the fact that they are the ones that are bloodied and bruised, the majority, a huge chunk of the human population, sees them as these violent monsters that are seeking to hurt children and hurt women. I can't even wrap my head around what it must be like to be a trans person who was hurting, and then for someone to say, well, that's what you deserve because you're the one who's hurting us and you haven't done anything. So I think that this book is something to really get passionate about, and it is a great book. I would say probably to read for a book club or to, share with your friends and family. I had a great time reading it. I definitely know it's something that I will come back to time and again, especially nowadays. The trans community just needs our support more than ever. So I implore you guys to continue to educate yourself, to continue to listen to people who are in the trans community rather than those who are just out here spreading misinformation about them. So 5 stars and highly recommend you read this. All right, guys, so these are all the books that I read other than Human Acts, which I have started but have not yet finished. I essentially read all the books that I wanted to read. I did replace one book, which was The Hells of Notre Dame, which I replaced with For the Love of the Phantom, and then I did, unfortunately, DNF just for the camera. But other than that, I think it was a really great reading month. I would definitely say that the transgender issue was my favorite book of the month, and unfortunately, The Phantom of the Opera was my least favorite of the month. I would love for you guys to tell me what books you read this month, which books were your favorite, which books were your least favorite. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!